The United States had a major role in the victory of the Allies during World War II, and a lot of that success can be attributed to the effectiveness of the Navy. What warships did these war heroes use to defeat Hitler and the Axis of Powers? Stay with us to find out. By the First World War, the US Navy had only begun building a decent fleet, but by the time the Second World War hit, the US was working towards having one of the world's most formidable navies. One of the ships that made this possible was the early Standard-type battleships. These are not the most spoken about ships during the Second World War, and for good reason. Some Standard-type battleships had been commissioned since 1916, which was before the First War even finished. And although they were considered super dreadnoughts at the time, these ships were outdated by 1939 when the Second War began. Notwithstanding, these ships still came in handy during World War II. Consisting of the Nevada, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, and Tennessee classes, these battleships underwent a series of upgrades and modernization in the decades between the First and Second World Wars. So by 1941, when the US got involved in the Second World War, the Standard-type battleships were able to serve. Some were assigned to the Atlantic Fleet, while others formed Battleship Row at Pearl Harbor. Mostly these ships served mainly as fire support for amphibious landings because they were deemed too slow to get frontline duties when compared with fleet carriers, which were more common at the time. A couple of the Standard-type battleships did get involved in actual battles though, like when 6 of them took part and came out unscathed in the Battle of Surigao Strait, which actually turned out to be the last battleship versus battleship engagement in naval history. The ships were designed with all-or-nothing armor schemes, each having its main guns on the center line and fore and aft turrets, with no amidship guns. They also had a decent range of about 8,000 nautical miles at economical cruising speed. But all these were for the earlier Standard-type battleships alone. The most recent class of ships that served more effectively during World War II were the Colorado-class battleships. A class consisting of 4 ships: Colorado, West Virginia, Washington, and Maryland. These were the last and most powerful US Navy battleships that were in service before the eve of World War II. According to the original design, they were originally armed with 8 16-inch 45 caliber guns and 4 dual turrets, but were similar in size to the Tennessee-class ships preceding them. They had a clipper bow, which helped keep the ships drier in heavy seas, and made use of turbo-electric transmission with 4 propeller shafts. By the beginning of World War II, however, the Colorados had undergone a lot of improvements as the US Navy decided to apply lessons learned by the British. These improvements included the removal of all 5-inch 25 caliber guns and 5-inch 51, which were replaced with dual-purpose 5-inch 38 guns, which were later changed to 16-inch 45 caliber Mark V and Mark VIII guns. The ships also had their superstructure away as to clear arcs of fire for the newly anti-aircraft weapons, as well as the addition of 6 extra quad 1.1-inch guns. During World War II, these ships also had an improved air defense system, with the older 5-inch 25 caliber and quadruple mount 1.1-inch 75 caliber guns still in place, and new 16 Bofors 40mm guns in quad mounts, and up to 32 Oerlikon 20mm cannons in single mounts being added. The ship's anti-aircraft defense was again improved in 1944 during the later years of the war, this time adding at least 20 quad 4mm Bofors mounts to each ship. The Colorados also had 5 compartments separated by armored bulkheads, 0.75 inches thick, added on either side for improved underwater protection. Thanks to all these improvements, the 3 Colorado-class ships were able to serve extensively during World War II. USS Maryland and USS West Virginia were at the front line of the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. The latter actually got sunk during the attack, but was later repaired. The 3 ships also served as naval gunfire support ships all through the war, and surprisingly enough, survived the entire war, only to be placed in the reserve fleet and eventually broken down for scrap in the 1950s. These next classes of ships, however, were pretty much designed just for World War II, the North Carolina-class battleships. Built between 1937 and 1941, these ships are one of the most strategically constructed vessels the US Navy has ever had. Despite the class having just 2 ships, North Carolina and Washington, A minimum of 35 different designs were proposed before construction even began. Eventually, the design number 16 was chosen to be the base idea behind these ships. The result was a class of considerably large ships, with dimensions 217.456 meters by 33.017 meters, with a standard displacement of up to 36,600 long tons of room to occupy 2,339 persons. These vessels were designed with a bulbous bow on the hull, which had an unusual stern design to improve the flow conditions of the propellers. These ships also had better skeg arrangements than previous models, which improved the structural strength of the stern while providing additional structural continuity to the torpedo bulkheads. For the North Carolinas, their main armament included 9 16-inch 45 caliber Mark VI guns and 25-inch 38 caliber Mark 12 guns, while their lighter armament had a range of numbers of 1.1-inch 75 caliber, 50 caliber machine guns, Bofors 44mm and Oerlikon 20mm. They also had turrets, which held 3 guns and a secondary battery of 10 Mark 28 Mod 0 enclosed base ring mounts, each supporting twin 5-inch 38 caliber Mark 12 guns. These secondary battery turned out to be successful. They became a staple for every major warship constructed over the next decade. And how about the electronics on these beauties? Both North Carolina and Washington had a Mark 27 microwave radar and a Mark III main armament radar for fire control and navigational optical rangefinders. They also had a pretty thick all-for-nothing armor made up of an armored raft that covered from the first gun turret to the rear gun turret. So being lethal and heavily armed, it's no surprise these ships were used extensively during the Second World War. By that we mean the 2 battleships being used to carry out all types of roles, from escorting fast carrier task forces during the Battle of the Philippine Sea to conducting short bombardments. Washington was even used in surface engagements, like the naval battle of Guadalcanal, where he terribly damaged a Japanese battleship. However, both battleships suffered a lot of damage during the war. North Carolina got hit by a torpedo in 1942, while Washington collided with another ship in 1944. They'd later be repaired and kept in commission for a few years after the war, after which one was turned into a museum ship and the other broken down for parts. Impressive as they may be, though, the North Carolina battleships weren't the peak of naval power for the US throughout the war, not while the South Dakota-class battleships existed. Although these ships were a little smaller in size than their predecessors, the South Dakotas were more efficient, with the hull having a bulbous bow, quality skegs arrangement, and triple bottom under the armor citadel. These ships had a slightly shorter hull form than the North Carolinas, which really helped to improve the ship's maneuverability and drastically reduce excessive vibration. The ship's main battery featured 9 16-inch 45 caliber Mark VI guns and 3 3-gun turrets, 2 in a super-firing pair forward, and 1 mounted aft of the main superstructure. The secondary battery, on the other hand, was 16 5-inch 38 caliber Mark 12 guns and 8 Mark 28 Mod 0 twin dual-purpose mounts, thanks to the extra deck on these vessels' conning tower. They also had quite a lot of anti-aircraft weaponry, which were changed over time, from the 12.5-inch machine guns and 12 1.1-inch autocannons to 8.5-inch and 28 1.1-inch machine guns and 16 20mm Oerlikon cannons. This battery was further changed a couple of times until finally 5 Oerlikons were added, 4 Bofors were removed, and a maximum of 145 anti-aircraft guns were installed. The South Dakotas also had improved radar technology. Air and surface search radars, Mark 8 radar fire control, which made them formidable against the Japanese Navy during the war. Perhaps the most impressive upgrades of all this is that the ships in this class also had very commendable armor, as they were designed to withstand a 16-inch shell fire. During World War II, the leading ship in this class, USS South Dakota, escorted aircraft carriers as part of Task Force 16, shot down nearly 30 Japanese planes during the Battle of Santa Cruz, and sailed in the Pacific mostly as a carrier escort. Other ships in the class, USS Indiana, USS Massachusetts, and USS Alabama, all had similar deployments. They shot down Japanese planes, French and Italian battleships, and participated in a large number of combative fleet operations. Despite the 4 ships taking significant hits at different times of the war, they all made it to the end in one piece. Next are the Iowa-class battleships. which were the fastest US Navy ships during the war. They were designed specifically to intercept fast capital ships, like the Japanese Kongo class, and are made up of 6 vessels: Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Kentucky. Only the first 4 served in the Second World War, though. You should also know that these were the last battleships commissioned in the US Navy, and they were very effective for over 5 decades, becoming some sort of cultural icon for the US Navy. And not just for their service in the Second World War, but also for the important shore bombardment duties in North Korea, North Vietnam, the Middle East, and their service in the Cold War. During World War II, these ships served as fast escorts for Essex-class aircraft carriers of the Fast Carrier Task Force. They also effectively shelled Japanese positions, and today, virtually every movie, TV show, or video game that portrays a US World War II battleship uses the likeness of the Iowa-class battleships. Constructed specifically to be of great speed, these ships had a double-bottom hull and armored skegs around the inboard shafts. The double-bottom hull could also become a triple-bottom under the armored citadel, and the ships had a lengthened forecastle and a midship, which also improved their speed. Despite being speed-oriented, the Iowas also had a very good stability and impressive maneuverability in open water, which wasn't common for fast vessels of their size. These beauties had 9 16-inch 50 caliber Mark VII naval guns, which fired both high explosive and armor-piercing shells as their primary guns. They also carried 25-inch 38 caliber Mark 12 guns in 10 Mark 28 Mod 2 enclosed base ring mounts. These secondary guns, which were originally meant to be carried by destroyers, but ended up being so effective with the Iowas that they were added to nearly every American vessel during the war. Perhaps the least impressive aspect of the Iowa ships was their anti-aircraft battery. At first, 20 quad 40mm AA gun mounts and 49 single 20mm mounts were used. At first, they only needed to be augmented with the Mk14 range sight and Mk51 fire control system for better accuracy. Soon after deployment, however, it was noted that these anti-aircraft guns needed to be more lethal. So the Oerlikon 20mm guns were introduced. These guns also proved ineffective against the Japanese kamikaze attacks during the later stages of the war, and later had to be replaced with the heavier Bofors 40mm AA guns. For armor, the Iowas had heavy protection against shell fire and bombs, and also underwater anti-torpedo protection. However, these ships didn't have their armor as effective as they should have been, because increasing the armor would reduce the ship's speed, which wasn't something the Navy was willing to sacrifice. All 4 Iowa battleships used in World War II also had SK air search radar and CG surface search radars on the main mast. These electronics were later switched with the SK2 air search radar and SG surface search radar, and many modifications were made in the years that followed as military sensor and radar technology improved around the world. They may be outdated today, but back then, the Iowa-class battleships were as good as it gets.